to another of the CCJ Conversation series. I'm here with a very special visiting guest from overseas. I'll introduce her in a moment, but let's begin, as we always do, by saying that we're in Melbourne, on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. My guest today is Liz Hirsh Naftali, visiting from New York, here on a very special mission, which we'll get to in a moment. But let's begin, as we always do with these conversations, is tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you grew up, and what place, if any, religion played in your life growing up until today.
So I'm originally from Los Angeles, and I grew up there, and then I moved to Israel, raised kids in Israel for many years.
As an adult, obviously.
As an adult, Yeah, I went there, and I didn't speak Hebrew. And I went to shul growing up. We were part of a Reform shul, and for me, it was always very important, but we only really went on high holidays. And then moved to Israel, and then my family in Israel never went to shul because they were in Israel. And then
so secular,
very secular, and raised my kids there. Spent a lot of time living there during the 1990s, full time, and then from early 2001 till now, been basically half and half. But now I also live in New York, and I am. I've been for the last 20 months. Traveling a lot.
We'll come back to that in a minute.
But I'm saying, for me, the whole thing was always the love of Israel. My father was the president of the Jewish Federation in Los Angeles. My mother dedicated many years to helping Soviet Jews escape the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. And also one other thing about Israel is that growing up, it was very important for my family to support Israel, the state, but also to figure out how to support places like in Jaffa in Tel Aviv that helped with coexistence.
Beautiful. Okay, that's wonderful. That's very important, especially to our audience.
And to this day, it's something that my parents are gone, but it's something that I've continued, and we work with the mayor of Tel Aviv, Ron Huldai, and when I lived in Israel, to work with making sure that in Jaffa there is coexistence and that people have what they need in terms of like social welfare. And then another thing that I did was that when I moved to Israel, my husband then and I started a shopping center company. And for me, once we started to get profit, what I started was a form of the giving. The company's called Big Shopping Centers. And then I took it and I said, we're going to donate a certain percentage every month, every year to the places where we had shopping centers. And most of that also was for children living, Christian, Muslim, Jewish children, for coexistence.
And especially Jaffa is one of the most diverse cities in Israel.
And also we did things in like Nazareth and all over. You think about all these pockets of people that are living in Israel. There's many that are not Jewish, but they live in the Jewish state, and they have this beautiful coexistence. So for me, it was how do we promote that, and how do we get more activities where the kids are actually working together, not staying in their own silos.
So talk about kids and talk about advocacy. You're here on a very special mission. Tell us a little bit about Abigail. You'll tell us who she is, and what your advocacy has been over the last 19 months.
So going back to October 7th, I was in Israel, and I learned very early in the morning as I was running back and forth in Tel Aviv to and from bomb shelter security area, which was the stairwell at my hotel, that something was happening along the border with Gaza. And I had family, as I lived in Israel for many years, I had family that lived along the border in a community called Kfar Aza.
Which is on the border with Gaza.
Which is directly on the border with Gaza City. Like you look across the field and they are neighbors. And this is a very peaceful community that just lived their own lives and never wanted any kind of animosity or anything. And they just did their own thing. And so I spent a lot of time there on holidays and raising my kids. And I was there on October 7th, 2023. And this was happening. And I called my family, my sister-in-law, my niece, and no one answered. And then I called another relative in Tel Aviv and I said, what's going on? And the first thing she said was that my niece Smadar, her husband Roe, and their baby girl Abigail, who was just 3, had been murdered that morning by Hamas terrorists. And what I, at that moment, understood was that we got this information from their 6 and 9-year-old children who had witnessed all the murder and had run home and locked themselves in a closet with a cell phone for 14 hours. And that's how I spent October 7th, learning that very early in the morning. But what I also did was start to tell people in Israel, my family and friends, and then throughout the day and the evening, people were calling from all over the world, mainly from the United States, but from all over the world, even here in Australia, saying, how's your family? And I couldn't say we're okay. And I told them at that point, because we believed that Abigail, 3 years old, and her parents were murdered. And Abigail actually had survived. We learned that about 5 or 6 days later. And crawled out and went for help, and then was taken as a hostage for 51 days. I was back in America. People said, go back to America and tell the story, help us. And I did that. In the beginning, I was telling people a story about Abigail being killed. And then I was able to tell people a story about hope, which was Abigail was a hostage, which is horrible to say, but it was that first moment of light in the most devastating, tragic time for our family, that she was a hostage. And we had something that we could believe in. And for me, then it became what I did, which was doing everything to help bring Abigail home, but all the hostages, all 250, and I can talk about that more. But I did that by myself in the beginning, and then with more and more families that started to come from Israel.
We should say that Abigail was a dual citizen.
Yeah, so Abigail and her mother, Smedar, her grandfather fought in World War II as an American, made Aliyah. It's a beautiful story. And this is a family that generally just came, loved Israel, quiet, and doing their thing. And here's Abigail. And
but as a dual citizen, you became her advocate.
Yeah, and I'm an American. And so what I did was join with the American families. There were 12 Americans kidnapped that day, 46 that were murdered. But what I also understood was that, yes, we had a special ability to speak with the White House and with President Biden and his team, which we had for the first 51 days. But then even after Abigail was released, I stayed and I kept fighting, and we kept having that relationship. But we also had the whole US government on top of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. that was meeting with myself, but so many families that were coming. This was the place that people were coming from Israel and from all over the world to fight for the hostages. It was the United States. And we had Democrats and Republicans, and I really, I talk about this because it's a moment of understanding that we had this connectivity where we had both the right and the left of America fighting for the hostages. And then we had President Biden and his team fighting for the hostages.
Which is very important in terms of diversity that we all promote. Having the left and the right come together is also possibly a unique moment in American history, as we know. And there's a lot of division in America.
A lot of division. And we were meeting with Christian leaders, Jewish leaders, Muslim leaders, and it did not matter. I mean, I sat in meetings in the beginning. I write about this in the book that I wrote about saving Abigail. And I talk about a woman named Penny Nance, a Christian, evangelical Christian woman, who that first day when I got to Capitol Hill, she prayed. She prayed with myself and this other family of Keith Siegel. And we were the only ones there. This was right in the very beginning. And she held our hands and she prayed. And I have to tell you, it didn't matter that it wasn't a Jewish prayer. It was a prayer, but it was connectivity, it was love. And then this woman, to this day, has been, and her organization, Concerned Women for America. And again, we can talk about things we don't agree on, but here we had this beautiful relationship.
Sure.
And she then proceeded to take us to meet with leaders that I may not have had access to or known that early on, but she was there doing that. And it was amazing.
So Abigail was released after 51 days. You can tell us a little bit about how that happened. But since then, you've continued to be an advocate, and you're actually here on a speaking tour as part of that advocacy work. Why are you still involved in that process, even though your family has been released?
So look, Abigail was blessed to be miraculously released. But I'm also very clear that it was the leadership of President Biden and the American government, with the Qataris doing the mediation, that brought back Abigail and 104 other women and children and some foreign workers. But when Abigail was released on the third day, and it stopped after 1 week, and after that, no one else came out. But what I understood was that on October 6th, I went to bed, and on October 7th, I woke up in this geopolitical nightmare, but I also woke up with a new family. And this family had Christians, Muslims, it had people from over 30 nations that were affected by the kidnapping, even I also talk about the fact that her parents were murdered. 1,200 people were murdered, and two of them were my niece and her husband. And then their kid was stolen, and she was a hostage. But you were dealing with families that were from all over, 30 nations, and different religions. But the one thing you understood was we were in this together. And it was bigger than the 250 families. It was bigger than the 12 American, because the Americans were all dual citizens. And it was bigger than the 250, and it was bigger than the 1,200 murdered. It was truly that we were all in this together. And so when Abigail was released, some people said, oh, you're the lucky one. And I said, you know what, we are blessed. But there's no luck. But what I understood was that we were all in this together. And I spent days and hours with the Americans, but with so many families coming to Washington, D.C. that you hear their stories and you never met their loved ones that are being held, but you feel like you can.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, you don't stop. You actually think, okay, Abigail is now safe, and my niece and her husband are going to take care of her. I still have work to do.
So on that sentiment, there's been many others who've helped you along the way, and the civil society in Israel, including many of the Christian community. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, the press and the news is always about the people that are hateful, and the people that are out there that aren't supporting the Jewish people. But what I have learned from this is there are so many more good people that need to be told what happened and educated. And I hope through this they get educated more. But what I have understood is that the Christian community, there's been so many more people that have reached out and been there for myself, for the families, for the hostages in Israel and across the world. And I can speak about America. So, I talked about Penny Nance and her organization and the love and support that we've received. But when I say we, I meant collectively Israel and the hostage families. But then one day, I like to tell this story, people were saying, and I'm going to be honest, they were saying, the Black population's not there for us. And that wasn't true. Yes, there were people that were very angry, but the majority of people in the African American community were supportive and have been supportive, but that's not what the news picks up on, and that's not the loudest voice in the room.
We call it the silent majority.
Yeah, but I'll tell you this story. So one day I'm in a cab in New York, I'm going uptown, and I'm talking to a rabbi. And I don't know her, I've just been introduced. She's a rabbi in Tennessee, and I'm telling her my story. And I get uptown and I'm going to a meeting and I say to the rabbi, excuse me, I have to get out. And I say to the driver, thank you very much. I pay, I do my thing. And this older Black man turns around and he says, God bless you.
The driver.
The driver. And I said, excuse me? Like I wasn't paying attention because I was. I was paying attention, but I was going back to get out. And I said, excuse me? He said, God bless you. And I said, thank you. And he said, you keep doing that work. You keep taking care. And I just want to say, God bless you for the work you're doing. And I still get the chills. I will never see this man again. But he gave me so much love and warmth in that moment. And he was listening. And that tells you that there's so many people, they need to hear the stories. And when he understood what happened to my family, he understood that I was still in this war to bring home, this fight to bring home all these people. And also, Alex, to find a way to stop fighting. He was there. And I could tell you more and more stories, but that one just really stuck out and really still fills my heart.
And as part of this advocacy work, you mentioned you travel back and forth between Israel and America, but also around the world. That's partly why you're here. Can you tell us some more of some of the support you've received and heard, especially from the non-Jewish community and some of the people you've met?
Yeah, the first day that I got to Sydney was meeting with multi-faith leaders. And it was organized by a rabbi, but it was multi-faith leaders. And it was people from all different forms of Christianity, and we were having conversations that were about supporting the hostages, supporting the people of Israel, supporting the Jewish state. And I can tell you that same story when I spoke in the UK. I can tell you that same story when I spoke in Oklahoma and Tulsa, Oklahoma a few weeks ago. There is this, and I will talk a little bit later about the work I was doing before this podcast, because what I understood as just an individual before October 7th is we weren't talking to others. We were staying in our silos.
Some of us were.
No, I'm saying you're right. I was, you were, but many people weren't. And others were somebody that we put aside. And what I understand from this moment is that we need to find as much connectivity as we can, but it's got to be based on truth, and it's got to be connected by what do we share in common. And what I've learned is there is so much more we share in common than what divides us. And at the end of the day, whatever it is that we can share can actually build and foster better relationships individually, but I think also collectively.
Well, you're speaking very much to the mantra of the
I
Council
know,
of Christian
but I've learned
Engineers.
that, and I don't know you before a week ago, and that's the way I understand it.
Yeah. So on that note, let's go back to what you were doing before. Apart from your business interests, you also started a podcast before October 7th. Tell us a little bit about that.
So before October 7th, in the spring of 2023, I had done a lot of work to raise money and to support candidates, women candidates, diverse candidates, mostly in the Democratic Party. But what I was seeing was that we weren't telling each other our stories, and we weren't talking across the aisle. And so for me, I started this podcast, which is called the Capital Coffee Connection Podcast. And my goal was to speak with our elected leaders. And you may not know them, but they're very diverse. They come from all over the world. They come from many different backgrounds. But what I was understanding was that if we could break it down, and I could just have you hear 25 minutes of one person, and you didn't know if he was or she was a Democrat or Republican, you would just say, wow, that's an amazing person. They've got an interesting life. They talk about their grandparents. They talk about how they got to America. We're a country of immigrants. As are you. They talk about teachers that influence them. And then we do this part, which I love, which is just like easy questions: favorite color, favorite scent, favorite household chore. You know, things that just that break it down, that have, nobody asks like, is your favorite scent lemon? Are you a Democrat or Republican?
Right.
You know, you just say, I like lemon, or you go, oh.
Yeah.
And you hear about their favorite foods. And what I understood was that on the Capital Coffee Connection podcast, I was able to have conversations with anybody, and that there wasn't anything. We don't talk politics or policy. So they're evergreen. So if somebody wanted to go and listen to last year and hear from a guy named Steve Scalise, a far right, conservative Republican in the House, where he's the leader, or you go to Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leader of the Democratic Party, African American man from New York, very much on the progressive, not over, but on the progressive. And the two of them, you hear their stories. They both love going home to their family on the weekends. They have 2 kids each. They talk about family time. They talk about the chores that their wives make them do. And you think to yourself, and then at the end, they like each other. Because I find this out by talking. They like each other. Now, they disagree on many things, but they like each other. And so then October 7th happened, and I had to stop because I had to go and fight for Abigail and the hostages. But when I started up again and realizing that I was going back to do this work because I had to have a balance, this is my happy work. The hostage work is hard. It's really hard. And you give so much love, and you give so much time and energy, and you see so little movement sometimes, but you know you have to keep going. But having conversations with people, leaders, was always a little bit, light.
Easy for you as well.
Yeah. But what I understood was this idea of the concept of this podcast came to life in the hostage work. I all of a sudden saw that in this work, we're talking to Democrats and Republicans, and it didn't matter if they were from the most conservative red state, the most liberal blue state. It didn't matter if they were rural or suburban. If you told the stories and you had that opportunity, they understood this humanitarian crisis, they understood the terror attack of October 7th, and you had their support.
So obviously you've changed the focus a little of your podcasts since October 7th to talk about those issues as well, or not?
No, actually sometimes I do if there's leaders that are, that have been very helpful, because I have found that there's been like a Steve Scalise, who was one of the first people that I met on Capitol Hill, and I would have never met him before. But I talk about meeting him, and then he came on this podcast, and afterwards I was like, he is a great guy. And it's not that I didn't like him before, I just didn't know him. And so when you ask, the thing that I found is that no, I haven't really changed it. It has just made me understand that no matter how crazy politics is and the world of negativity, that this is the work I'm going to keep doing. It's like the work you're doing, Alex. It's like, that it takes one person at a time, but you keep doing it.
So as one person talking to another person, I want to thank you for sharing your story. I want to thank you for your advocacy work on behalf of all of us and on behalf of the hostages that you're still advocating for today. And as a final thing, if there's any other message you'd like to share, particularly to our Christian audience and to our non-Jewish audience who may be listening, about some of the things that you're doing, I think it's important.
Yeah, so I just want to show this picture. And it may not be clear to you, but this is a picture of 24 young men.
As of today.
Still, as of today, one came home 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, Edon Alexander, kid who grew up in New Jersey, also dual citizen. But these are 23 young men that we believe are alive. And after almost 600 days, they're still being held hostage. They are starved, they're abused, they are shackled. Many of them were sustaining injuries on October 7th, 2023. And while we pray for them, and I know everybody who's listening is praying, I need everybody to also know that nobody from any international, like Red Cross, has gone to visit them. They've had no medical attention, and they are starving. And every day that they are in Gaza is another day that they could lose their lives. And there's many reasons they could, but we've already seen them losing their lives. So for me, one of the reasons I'm here is to advocate for these hostages. Israel must be a secure state. The Middle East needs to figure out how to move forward where there's not violence. And it starts with Israel being secure. But for me, for Israel's future, and I care so much about this country, until these people come home, the country of Israel cannot move forward. And it's traumatized. And these are 24 of actually 58 people. And many of them are deceased.
As we speak today.
As we speak, but we know the decency and the need for not only the Jewish people, but for all people to bury their loved ones and to give them the honor and dignity. We're still waiting for that also. And look, I'll say this, Alex, like I wrote this book because what I understood was if you tell a story, you need to show faces. And this is the face I showed, which was Abigail's face very early on. But what I understood is that if you don't tell a story, people can just say hostages. They can just say somebody else. But this is the face of a hostage. And Abigail was one of 35 children under the age of 18 that were stolen on October 7th. And they all experienced horrific things before they were taken, and then they were taken. And so I can just say to you, this book tells a full story of the work I went to do, that I was inspired and motivated to do, but it talks about the Christian community. It talks about the diversity. It talks about all the things that we need to keep promoting. Starts with the release of the hostages, but I really go into this from a human perspective, and because at the end of the day, I can't watch Abigail and her generation living in Israel, in Gaza, here in Australia, anywhere in America, where we're not fighting for this world that I know you believe so strongly in. And so I wrote this book, and that brings me here to talk, but it's not a book tour. It's a tour about telling the truth. It's a tour about talking of resilience, of Abigail, the Jewish people, the Christian communities that have supported us, the resilience of people fighting to bring home these hostages every week, all over the world and in Israel. There's also a message of hope. My hope is that people will understand this, but fight. Not end in despair, but use hope and love and try to figure out how we work together. And that is my final message here. And I address this to Amalia and Michael, Abigail's siblings, and Abigail and their cousins, who they all are now living together. And I hadn't thought about this until we sat down, which was my final note is to them, that we're doing this for them. And they really represent all the children. So I'll end on that.
Well, thank you very much. That's a lovely message of hope for your family, for our shared human family, and I'm sure all of us are praying for the survival of the hostages that are still in Gaza, for the release of all the others, and in general, once they're released, like Abigail and others, that they can have a full and wonderful life. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your time in Australia. Thank you.